Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva visited the affected areas by the heavy rains and landslides in the coast of Sao Paulo, where at least 36 people have died. Social movements in the northern regions of Peru start a 48-hour strike against Dina Boluarte and the Congress. And the President of the United States, Joe Biden, arrived on an unannounced visit to the capital of Ukraine. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva visits on Monday the areas which have been hit by heavy rains and landslides on the Sao Paulo coast, especially in São Sebastião, where at least 36 people died. In a message posted last night on Twitter, Lula said that all levels of government will be brought together to attend to the injured, search for the missing, and restore roads, power, and telecommunications links to the region. Lula also regretted the deaths caused by the rains and expressed solidarity with the families. Rescue workers continue to search for at least 40 missing people, as well as reconnecting isolated communities and clearing blocked roads that trapped an unknown number of tourists who traveled to attend carnival celebrations. Sao Paulo state government said in a statement that 35 people died in the city of São Sebastião and a 7-year-old girl was killed in neighboring Ubatuba. Peruvian authorities reported that over 800 people lost their homes as a result of the heavy rains affecting the country. The National Emergencies Department, this SEN, reported that despite the material damage, no human losses have been reported in the areas affected by the floods. The agency explained that rescue and assistance teams are working in coordination with local authorities to deal with the situation. Meanwhile, other groups deployed in trucks loaded with food and humanitarian aid are assisting people affected. The heavy rains started on Thursday, February 16th in the department of Amambay and resulted in the overflowing of large rivers, affecting the main roads and buildings in the region. In Chile, a reactivation of forest fires is reported in the regions of Biobío and Araucanía in southern parts of the country. Chile's Minister of the Interior, Carolina Toja, informed that a total of 256 forest fires have been reported in the country, of which 151 are under control and 67 are still being fought by firefighters and military. According to the high official of Chile's government, the fire has reached worrying proportions in several communities and populated areas of the Araucanía region. Meanwhile, in the Biobío region, the fires developed much more severely than expected. According to official reports based on evaluations made by the National Forestry Corporation, around 25% of the fires registered this year have been intentional, something that in the last 2 weeks has left 25 people dead and over 400,000 hectares burned throughout the South American country. And Mozambicans are bracing for more heavy rains as another tropical cyclone gathers pace in the Indian Ocean and moves towards the southeastern African coastline. In this sense, Mozambican President Filipe Nyusi returned early to the country from the African Union Summit in order to monitor his nation's response to heavy rains and the impending tropical cyclone Freddy. In the same way, the National Institute of Meteorology warned that Freddy could or will make landfall in Madagascar on Tuesday and is then expected to re-enter the Mozambican Channel by February 24th. This will be the second cyclone to hit the East African nation this year, following Cyclone Gombe that affected parts of the country in late January. And now we address other topics. Meanwhile, social organizations and unions in the Peruvian region of Arequipa participated on Monday in a new day of protest to demand the resignation of appointed President Dina Boluarte. Gathered in front of the defense of the northern cone of Arequipa, the groups explained that the mobilization was agreed in a meeting with representatives of other unions in the Peruvian city. In addition to workers' unions, students, vendors, and civil construction workers of the Arequipa region also joined the demonstrations. Organizers of the protest stated that demonstrators went down several streets of the city until they reached the historic center. In addition to press for Dina Boluarte's resignation, protesters also demanded the dissolution of Congress and the holding of new elections. In Peru, the provinces of San Martín, Piura, Trujillo, and Lambayeque in the north of the country have begun a 48-hour strike in protest against the government of Dina Boluarte. Various organizations have joined the initiative, which has been preceded by occupations, mobilizations, strikes, and blockades throughout the north of the country. In addition to the claims against the executive, they repudiate what they qualify as obscure management of the legislature, where the possibility of calling elections has been blocked on repeated occasions. In the region of Arequipa, alongside two indigenous, farmers, students, and unions, the reserve will join the march in rejection of impunity. And Cuba's Minister of Foreign Trade, Rodrigo Malmierca, will strengthen bilateral ties with Colombia. Other authorities of that portfolio and of the National Institute for the Surveillance of Medicines and Food will also participate in the meeting. The Cuban official arrived on Sunday to the South American country on an official visit to strengthen the commercial cooperation and brotherhood ties between the two countries. According to his agenda, the visit will roll out until Wednesday, as the Cuban Foreign Trade Minister will meet with the president of ProColombia, the government agency in charge of promoting Colombian exports, international tourism and foreign investment, and will hold a meeting with the authorities of Bancoldex, the development bank for business growth in Colombia. Both countries established diplomatic relations in 1902 based on mutual respect and the observance of international law. National and international organizations rejected the militarization of Haiti. The offer made by Canada at the CARICOM summit strengthens the campaign against the intervention in the country. 8 days before the Caribbean State Summit, several organizations addressed a letter to the leaders of the member states. The International Conference of Solidarity with Haiti denounced the actions of Prime Minister Ariel Henry, who enabled the country to be a reflection of slave colonies. In this context, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced plans to send a warship to the Haitian coast, prompting the urgent relaunch of the campaign. Let's take a short break, but first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. United States President Joe Biden arrived on Monday in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv on an unannounced visit. Ukraine's media showed a picture of the head of the White House in the monastery of St. Michael of the Golden Domes. Minutes later, President Zelensky reported on the arrival of the president, who was astonished that 1 year after the war, Ukraine is still standing. The president's agenda is kept under reserve, and he was at the government headquarters, where he reaffirmed his commitment to the Ukrainian peer, to whom he will deliver $500 million of additional aid. Although there was no shelling upon Biden's arrival, all the country's sirens were activated. And the Russian Inquiry Committee is looking into the United States citizens and some officials of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry in connection with their involvement in the creation of biological weapons on the Ukrainian territory. According to Investigative Committee Chief Alexander Bastrinkin, the ministry continued to gather and document evidence of Kyiv's violation of the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production and Stockpiling of Bacteriological and Toxin Weapons and on their destruction. He also said that at present, more than 10 U.S. citizens, as well as a number of Ukrainian Defense Ministry officials, are under investigation for their involvement in double-purposes biological programs. The European Union's High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, called on Sunday to speed up and increase military assistance to Ukraine. In a speech at the 59th Security Conference in Munich, Borrell considered that Ukraine is a member of the European family and urged the need to speed up military aid to this country. In this sense, he condemned that certain countries of the bloc show skepticism towards the support to Kiev and called on these countries to behave in accordance with the universal values they defend. The High Commissioner was also in favor of Ukraine's entry into the European Union. However, he recalled that this will require changes both in the European Union and in Ukraine, which will have to make reforms in order to meet the criteria. Thousands of ambulance workers on Monday began walkouts across the United Kingdom and Wales over unresolved pay increases. So far, more than 10,000 workers remain on strike in Wales and in 7 of the 10 ambulance trusts in England. The GMB union, whose members work in nearly all industrial sectors, including the ambulance service, said in his Twitter account that the government is to blame entirely for the situation, since they refused to talk pay with the workers. Meanwhile, ambulance workers in Wales joined Monday's strike after rejecting a new pay offer from the Welsh government. Now we move on to other topics. Turkey concluded rescue efforts in all provinces except the 2 hardest hit by the last week's massive quake that killed tens of thousands. The nation's disaster agency head Yunus Desser said search and rescue efforts continue in about 40 buildings in the provinces of Hatay and Kahramanmaraş. There had been abundant coverage of rescue teams finding survivors, but that has now slowed, with no survivors found in at least 24 hours. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said some 2.2 million people have been evacuated or have left the affected provinces. Russia and Iran condemned an Israeli attack that killed 5 people and injured 15 in Syria's capital, Damascus. Both nations strongly expressed their rejection after Syrian air defenses repelled an Israeli aggression on the Kafar Susar neighborhood in Damascus on Saturday. As a result, 5 people were killed, including a soldier, while 15 civilians were injured and several houses were destroyed. Iran and the Russian officials called the attack a flagrant violation of international law. In this sense, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova urged the Israeli government to refrain from steps with dangerous consequences for the entire region. The attack on Damascus came less than 2 weeks after a deadly 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck northern Syria and southern Turkey. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Palestinians in the Jerusalem area launched a campaign of civil disobedience to protest Israeli abuses. Palestinian youth shut off the entrance to occupied East Jerusalem's Shuafat refugee camp with barricades and dumpsters, while Israeli forces fired rubber bullets and tear gas canisters that left at least 3 wounded. The youth called on the population not to attend workplaces located inside Israel and to boycott the occupying state by not paying bills and taxes. Meanwhile, activists reaffirmed their determination to continue with the civil disobedience until Israel authorities end their repressive practices against their neighborhoods and towns. In Afghanistan, the Taliban government assured it will further the plans to turn former foreign military bases into special economic zones. The Ministry of Commerce currently works on a plan for Afghan companies to collaborate in the creation of the economic zones in the country. According to officials, authorities will submit this proposal to the country's Economic Committee and Cabinet for approval. Likewise, they also announced the launch of a pilot to promote the special zones in the capital Kabul and the province of Balkh. The Taliban took over the country's government in 2021 when foreign forces left the nation after 20 years of occupation, leaving behind a war-torn economy. And the African Union insists it has a zero-tolerance policy towards unconstitutional change as it maintains its suspension of 4 military-ruled countries, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Sudan. Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Sudan, states located in the Sahel region, were sanctioned by the Pan-African body following coups in recent years, but the African Union said on Sunday it was ready to help them restore democracy. ECOWAS has also decided to impose travel bans on government officials and senior leaders of those countries. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, also said it was maintaining sanctions on the 3 Sahel countries. West African leaders met on the sidelines of the AU summit to review measures and discuss progress in restoring civilian rule in the 3 states. Kenyan President William Ruto called on Sunday for rich countries to be held accountable for driving global warming and for a revamp of international financial institutions to better fight climate change. At the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, where climate change is a major topic, Ruto said the time was ripe for a paradigm shift.
We are at a place where we have no options. Climate change is a daily reality in many parts of the world. And it is not getting better, it is getting worse unless something gives way, unless we have a honest conversation. We haven't made our voice clear. We haven't spoken about this with clarity. We haven't spoken about this loud enough. Continuing the impunity of turning on fossil fuels, turning on coal, as is happening today, puts the whole globe at risk.
In South Sudan, President Salva Kiir on Monday called on rebels to resume peace talks in the framework of the Juba Agreement for Peace. During the signing of the implementation of the Juba Agreement, the president also called on leaders of Sudanese opposition groups that are not part of the peace agreement to join the country's peace efforts. Salva Kiir stated that with the signing, his government can now engage in dialogue with the resistance, political and social groups to achieve a comprehensive peace. Key issues in the agreement included security arrangements for Darfur, South Kordofan, and Blue Nile State, as well as the exchange of wealth and power with opposition groups in central and northern Sudan. And North Korea fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles on Monday using its most modern launcher in its second launch in 48 hours. On Saturday, it had fired one of its powerful intercontinental ballistic missiles, which, according to Tokyo, landed in its exclusive economic zone, prompting Washington and Seoul to conduct joint air exercises, including a strategic bomber and a stealth fighter aircraft. According to Pyongyang, Monday's firing was precisely in response response to those maneuvers and blamed the United States and South Korea for the deteriorating security situation in the Korean peninsula. The North Korean leader's sister warned in a televised statement that the country is closely monitoring joint actions by Seoul and Washington and said that now or how often we use the Pacific as a firing range depends on the actions of the U.S. forces. South Korean military said this is a serious provocation that undermines peace and stability in the peninsula and called on Pyongyang to immediately cease such tests. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida called for a meeting of the UN Security Council scheduled for Tuesday. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.